Picher looks like a normal Midwestern town, but the soil, water, and air are full of lead, and the ground might collapse under your feet. This town in Turkey was abandoned after a government-mandated population swap that cleared it out overnight and left it to crumble. And a city called Agdam is littered with landmines. It's more battlefield than ghost town. These are abandoned cities too dangerous for humans. Picher used to be a busy mining town. Tons of lead and zinc came out of the ground here during the 20th century, especially during World War II, but nobody paid much attention to where all the leftover waste was going. The result was giant piles of leftover waste from mining operations called chat just sitting around the town. Kids used to play on them like they were sand dunes, not knowing they were full of lead. Years later, it turned out the whole place was contaminated. Lead poisoning was off the charts. On top of that, the ground underneath the town started collapsing because of how much had been hollowed out during decades of mining. Sinkholes opened up in random places. The government eventually stepped in and brought people out and basically said, yeah, you gotta leave. By 2009, it was officially abandoned. You can still go there technically, but it's not safe. Most of the buildings are gone and the few that are left are decaying. Kayaköy sits on a hillside in southwest Turkey. At first glance, it looks like an old ruined village, but it wasn't abandoned because of some natural disaster, it was politics. Kayaköy was a Greek village for hundreds of years, until the population exchange between Greece and Turkey in 1923. Basically, both countries decided to swap out entire communities based on their religion. Christians from Turkey were sent to Greece, and Muslims from Greece were sent to Turkey. The Greek families in Kayaköy were forced to leave, and even though new settlers were supposed to take their place, most never did. So the houses were left empty, and over time the place just fell apart. Now it's a full-on ghost village with hundreds of stone houses and a couple of churches, and they're all crumbling. What makes it dangerous today is the condition of these buildings. They're old, unstable, and parts of the town have been hit by earthquakes over the years. Some people go there to explore, but climbing around the ruins isn't exactly safe. Agdam in Azerbaijan used to be a city of around 40,000 people, but in the early 90s the entire population fled when Armenian forces moved in. The city was completely gutted. Buildings were abandoned, homes were looted, and eventually most of what was left got taken apart for scrap. And what's there now is this wide, empty grid of streets and rubble. You could still see the skeletons of houses, shops, and a mosque, but that's about it. The area is still considered a military zone, and parts of it are filled with landmines. It's super dangerous because there's no way to really know what's buried in the ground. Wittenoom was a mining town in Australia that popped up in the 1940s to support a blue asbestos mine. At the time, no one really understood how deadly asbestos was, so workers were inhaling the fibers, families were living right next to the mine, and kids were playing in dust piles. It was just everywhere. By the 60s, people started getting sick, really sick. The air in Wittenoom turned out to be toxic, and the government eventually shut everything down, but even after the mine closed, some people refused to leave. That changed when authorities cut off the power and water and stopped maintaining the roads, and they actually removed Wittenoom from official maps. The whole place was delisted as a town, and today it's surrounded by warning signs, and the contamination is still a huge problem. Asbestos doesn't really just go away, and the fibers are still in the soil and dust. Just walking around there can be dangerous if the wind kicks up. Almost all the buildings are gone, and only a couple of stubborn holdouts stayed behind, but even they're gone now. No one's supposed to go there, and if you do, you're basically risking lung damage for the sake of curiosity. Really not worth it. Herculaneum was buried almost instantly when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. It was the same eruption that destroyed Pompeii, but Herculaneum actually got it worse in some ways. Instead of just ash, it got hit by a wave of volcanic mud and toxic gas that moved so fast people didn't even have time to react. The whole town got sealed under something like 60 feet of it. That's actually what preserved it so well though. Buildings, furniture, wooden doors, and food, but that doesn't mean it's safe. The ruins are incredibly fragile. Buildings look solid, but they're really not. Parts of the site are still being excavated, and some areas are off limits because of how unstable they are. And here's the big issue, Vesuvius is still an active volcano. Over 3 million people live around it today. Scientists have no way to predict when it'll erupt again, so Yeah, the ancient city might be partially open to the public, but still sitting next to a ticking time bomb. Beichuan County in China was wiped out almost entirely by the 2008 Sichuan earthquake. The quake hit with a magnitude of 7.9 and destroyed most of the buildings in seconds. Whole apartment complexes just crumbled, schools collapsed while class was on, and thousands died, over 8,000 in Beichuan alone. The destruction was so bad that rescue workers couldn't even reach certain parts of the town. Afterward, the government decided not to rebuild. The damage was just too extensive and the ground had become unstable from landslides. Instead, a new town was built a few miles away, and the original one was turned into a memorial zone. You can visit certain parts of it with permission, but large sections are completely off limits. The buildings that are still standing are half tilted, full of cracks, and slowly breaking down with each passing year. And since the region is prone to earthquakes and landslides, there's always a chance there could be another disaster. Plymouth was the capital of Montserrat, a small island in the Caribbean. But in 1995, a volcano, which had been quiet for centuries, suddenly woke up. Over the next few years, it erupted on and off in waves. In 1997, it blew up again and completely buried Plymouth under ash. Some areas were hit with material over 30 feet deep. The whole southern half of the island was evacuated and declared an exclusion zone. The thing is, the volcano didn't stop. It is still considered active. Buildings are still standing in some areas, but they're buried up to their rooftops or split in half from lava and ash. You can also see traffic lights poking out of the ground. No one lives there, and no one's allowed to go back permanently. Occasionally, researchers will go in with permission, but that's about it. The entire area is under strict control because the volcano could erupt again with very little warning. It's still hot underground, and the air quality can turn dangerous on a dime. This next city has got to be one of the most bizarre I've ever heard of. This is the story of a car company who decided to build a town in the middle of the Amazon, Fordlândia. In the 1920s, Henry Ford wanted to control his own rubber supply, so he bought a massive chunk of land in Brazil and started building an American-style town, complete with white picket fences, soda fountains, and there were also these strange rules about what people were allowed to eat and wear. Yeah, this didn't work. The locals didn't want to live like Americans, and the rubber trees didn't really grow like crops. See, they packed them too close together, and that made them a breeding ground for pests and disease. Everything that could go wrong, it did go wrong, and the whole project started to fall apart. Eventually, Ford gave up, and the place was abandoned. For a long time, there were only about 90 people holding out here, but as of 2017, actually, that number's grown to 3,000. People who'd been looking for places to live decided to go back into the town. But it's just not run by Ford anymore. Up next, we have this place. You're gonna have to put it in the text below. There's no way I'm not completely butchering that name. Anyway, this town was swallowed by a volcano. It was in 1943 when a farmer was working his fields that the ground cracked open and started spewing smoke and ash. In days, a brand new volcano had formed and started growing. Over the next few years, lava flows buried everything around it, including the town. Most of it disappeared, but one part weirdly survived, the top of the church. You can still see it today, half buried in solid lava, just the bell tower and part of the sanctuary sticking out. That's basically the only sign that there was ever a town here in the first place. Everyone was evacuated back when it all started and no one came back. Not just because their homes were gone, but because the land was unstable for years. The volcano eventually stopped erupting, but the ground is still jagged and tough to walk through. It's also surrounded by wilderness, so it's not an easy place to get to. People visit the church sometimes, but it's not some cleaned up touristy site. The area isn't active anymore, technically, but it's still volcanic land, which means unpredictable things can and do happen out there. And finally, we have Kadykchan, a mining town built in World War II deep in Siberia. It was cold, isolated, and pretty much existed for one reason: coal. It had schools, apartment buildings, a movie theater, the basics, but when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, so did demand for coal from this kind of remote spot. Then in 1996, there was a deadly explosion in one of the mines, and that was the final straw. The government shut everything down and paid off the remaining people living there to leave, and what's left is a full town just without any people. sitting out in the freezing wind. People do sneak in for the thrill of it, but it is risky. It's not just the cold that makes this place dangerous. With no maintenance for 30 years, everything is rotting or rusting, floors could collapse, staircases could break under your feet, and wild animals roam around too. There's no one guarding the place, but that also means there's no help if something goes wrong. I've been your host, James. I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.